Now so far, all of our elements have been created using the input tag, but there are a couple of other tags that we can use inside of our forms. And one of them is also a multiple choice, like our radio and checkboxes. Down a little bit lower, we have a question about your favorite color. And we could easily use radio buttons or checkboxes here, but let's try this one with a pull-down menu. In our forms, pull-down menus are created by using the select tag. So let's go back to our document and let's set one of those up. First of all, I'll add a line right down below your favorite color, and we'll start out our select tag. Like our input tags, the select tag does have a name attribute, so we'll set that up. I'll set ours equal to color. And then I'm going to close this tag up, because the structure is a little bit different. First of all, this is not an empty tag. We're actually going to need a closer tag down at the bottom here. So let me set that first. /select. And then inside of that tag, we want to add the options that we want to appear in our menu. Now, notice for radio buttons and checkboxes, we had an input for each option. Here, we're going to be using a tag called option. And I'll set up a beginning option tag and start off one of our first colors. Let's say red here. I'll put that right inside the tag and then just use a normal close option tag on the other side. We'll normally want a few options in our pull-down menu, so let me copy this and I'll paste it back in a few times and we'll just simply change the colors. I'll have one for blue and we'll make the next one green, and then we can add some other things like yellow, maybe orange, and finally brown. Now, just so we can see how this works, let's save our changes and let's go back out and refresh the page. You can see that a pull-down menu appears and it's sized to fit all the different elements that I've added. Our user can make a selection, and we didn't try it out before, but we can go ahead and click the send button and we see our email come up. We can see each one of the pieces of data dropped in here. There's the name in the email. You can see that the gender shows only the item that I have selected because that's a radio button. And the own shows both elements that I've checked since we're using a checkbox there. Finally, you can see my color element and you can see the selection that we've made for that. Now, our pull-down menus can be used in a couple of different ways. So let's go back to our document and we'll make a couple of changes. The first thing I want to look at is the data for the form element. Now, you'll notice when we set up the radio buttons and the checkboxes, we specified a value that was used for the data. But for our select list, it used whatever we typed inside the option tags as our data. Now, if you needed your data to be different than what was typed actually into the list, you could also use the value attribute and you would put it with each one of the option elements. I'll just set one up for the first one up here at the top. I'll add a value attribute first, and we'll set that equal to just the number 1. I'll save my change. We'll go back out to our page and refresh. And then I'll make sure I pick the first item and hit the send button. You can see that the color in this case equals the number 1. If I had chosen any of the other colors, since we didn't have a value attribute attached, it would have just shown the color name. Now, there's another attribute we can use with select tags that will actually change the way it works completely. Let me go back to my select tag here in the example, and what I'm going to do is add a size attribute. A lot of elements in HTML have sizes like fonts, but in this case, we're using size a little bit differently. What we're doing in this case is we're using it to determine how many rows of text we'll see if we convert this from a pull-down menu into just a scroll list. So I'm going to set my size at 4, and we'll try this out and see how this looks on our page. I'll save my change. We'll go back out to our document and refresh. And now you can see that in place of a pull-down menu, we actually have a list with a scroll bar. It still includes all the selections that we had before, but here I'm just changing the appearance so that we can view the items in list form and still make our selections. Now, when you're using a select list like this instead of a pull-down menu, there's one additional attribute you can use. And I'll go back over to my select tag and we'll add in the multiple attribute. There's really only one value for this and it looks a bit redundant, but the correct way to write this would be multiple equals multiple. And what this allows our user to do is they can go into our list and choose multiple values instead of just a single value. That way our list is acting more like a checkbox than a radio button. Let's try it out. I'll save my change. We'll go back over to my page and refresh. And now I can still select out of the list, but I can also use the Shift key to be able to select multiple values. Or, here, let me select again. I'll use, in this case on the Macintosh, the Command key, but of course on the PC that would be the Control key, and I can do individual additional selections for my list. When I hit the Send button, you can see that the data for the color sends all of the data for the selections that I made, just like the data for our checkboxes. Now there is one more option that we can use on each one of these multiple choice devices. Let me go back to our document, and I'll start with the select list first. I can pick out any one of these options and pre-select it for the user when they first open up the page. I'll do that by adding an attribute to whichever option I want to have selected. So let me add one to the blue option here. The attribute I want to use is selected. And a little bit like multiple, it looks redundant, but the correct way to write it is selected equals selected. We can do the same thing on radio buttons and checkboxes as well, but the attribute we'll use there is checked. So let me go up to the radio button first, and I'll choose the one for the female gender. I'll add in checked equals checked. And let me just copy that attribute because it's the same one used for checkboxes. I'll go down and set that for our mansion checkbox. Now let's save our changes. And this time, since I want to clear out our form, I'm just going to close the browser window and we'll go and reopen our tryout form elements page. And here you can see that the page starts out with a selection for female, a checkbox selected for mansion, and the blue color already selected. Of course, we can change any of those selections. Those are just starter selections. And of course, we can just send the data like we did before.